What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the debut album by rock band Marilyn Manson. Basically, this project is called Portrait of an American Family, and it came out in the summer of 1994. Now, the thing about this particular album is this is Marilyn Manson back in their affiliation days with Nine Inch Nails vocalist Trent Reznor and some of that type of stuff. They were the ones that helped discover Marilyn Manson back in the day, back in 93, 92, 94, as far as that pitch kind of happened. This is back when Marilyn Manson was like super controversial and stuff. They were pretty much like shock rock music as far as that kind of went throughout the mid 90s between this album, Portrait of an American Family, and then Antichrist Superstar, maybe a little bit of Mechanical Animals and Hollywood, some of those type ones. Marilyn Manson, especially Smells Like Children. That's another one that did a lot of damage, I'd have to say. But Marilyn Manson was particularly like a pretty controversial rock group that almost didn't put out their album, at least on initially. It was going to come out earlier in 1994, but the concept behind it, they just didn't like the references to Charles Manson. They didn't like the references to Charles Manson and that type of stuff as far as that pitch kind of happened. But I look after this is just a particular kind of hit album. This is definitely like pretty damn near well a classic debut of a rock album, I'd have to say. Definitely one of the definitely one of the bigger. This is definitely one of the bigger rock albums of like the mid 90s and especially 1994. And this was kind of another page turner of an album after like grunge's kind of dissipation in early 1994 between Lane Staley and Kurt Cobain kind of dissipating as far as that kind of happens between Green Day kind of spicing things up with punk rock music. This is another one. There were some other folks that kind of blossomed in 1994 like Marilyn Manson and Korn, both of which did a great job in 94. And this is just an overall hit album. Definitely like the vibe of this particular one. This is just overall, this is kind of a revolutionary album in a sense because apart from like Alice Cooper and maybe like a couple other folks, maybe Rob Zombie and White Zombie, folks like that, there weren't a ton of like ghastly kind of musicians apart from Marilyn Manson around this particular time. Korn and Marilyn Manson really spiced things up in 94 as far as some of their haunting and kind of horrific type tones that these particular artists kind of had. And it was just kind of a ghastly type of feel that was just different from like the normal kind of peppiness and just kind of more this kind of commercial and pop rock type of feel that things kind of had in like the early 90s as far as that kind of particularly kind of happened. I mean, Alice Cooper was large around that time, but he was kind of Alice Cooper kind of did some of this stuff in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, but he was kind of like it. Marilyn Manson had that shock appeal and just delivered upon these particular hit songs and just did a lot of damage around this time. So Marilyn Manson would last for a good while. He had a ton of revolutionary type albums as far as that pitch kind of happened. This is definitely some exhilarating type stuff, and I have to say, it's just some overall excellent type of affairs that just did a lot of things right and pulled it off on top of that, I'd have to say. So we'll go ahead and talk about the singles. There were two and a half of them. There were two singles plus a promotional single, I'd have to say. The thing about Marilyn Manson, though, is just the fact that kind of similar to Korn, they didn't really get their start until about 95, 96, where particularly like the two singles off this album, Get Your Gun and Lunchbox, didn't really chart that heavily. It was really the song that made Marilyn Manson, at least up to this, the song that made Marilyn Manson, at least up to that particular point, was the song Sweet Dreams that was on the Smells Like Children EP, and that was like a summer of 96 single. So the first couple of years, Marilyn Manson were just kind of ho-hum as far as that particularly kind of happened. Same thing with Korn until like Chutes and Ladders and Adidas kind of came out. It's the same sort of pitch. So this is kind of the album before the album. Really, Antichrist Superstar, which I reviewed several years ago back in 2016, that was like the hit album that really put Marilyn Manson on his feet. But they were definitely some shock rock kind of music, and they definitely had a lot of exhilarating type vibes to kind of particularly kind of have. But we'll go ahead and talk about the singles here. So the first single was Get Your Gun. And I'm also going to talk about the promotional single Dope Hat. So we'll talk about all three of the singles as far as that particularly kind of happens. But basically, Get Your Gun is like a harrowing kind of evening haze of a song, I'd have to say. It's like a solid day after hours prep for stepping out, I would definitely feel like. And it's just an exhilarating mood that this song particularly kind of has. Just an overall nice one, just very hazy, just kind of has that overall kind of this autumn-like fare as far as that pitch kind of happens. Definitely some haunting type music. I mean, it's pretty stark in comparison to later Marilyn Manson, but for 1994, this is definitely pretty exhilarating, I have to say. Definitely a chartable single that I would like to hear on the radio. I want to say I've heard this song at least once or twice or a few times on the radio as far as that pitch kind of happens. It's a vintage Marilyn Manson hit. Nowadays, you'd probably get the Beautiful People and songs like that. Moreover, like there's like some dope, I forget the name of the song, but it's like called the dope, something that has to do with dope off of Mechanical Animals, some of those type ones that are kind of like the pitch of some of those particular type singles, and then like Tourniquet and songs like that from like the mid 90s. But this is definitely like an early kind of Marilyn Manson hit, and they just kick things off with the right pitch. Definitely a pretty ghastly kind of harrowing type one to kind of get here. Just overall hits pretty heavily. And then Lunchbox is a nice one. And then Lunchbox, the second single, is a pretty nice one. This is like a shadowy kind of evening night venue pep of a song, I'd have to say. It's just a good dance and mild rave vibes. This song is just a good dance and mild rave vibes that this song particularly kind of gives off. And it's just a stretching, and this song is just a stretching kind of night outing fun that it particularly kind of has. So this one's a little bit more exhilarating than Get Your Gun, a little bit more peppy, a little bit more dance oriented. Lunchbox is a little bit more peppy and more dance oriented than Get Your Gun. I feel like Get Your Gun is definitely more malaise for like 4 o'clock, 5 p.m., something like that. Just got done with work, those type things. But I feel like Lunchbox just has a little bit more pep for like night venues, just dance and mild rave, just kind of in like a minor sense. It's kind of early type pitch as far as that kind of happens. Definitely for 1994, this could probably be played at a rave pretty damn well. I'd have to suppose it's a real definitely for 1994. This would be some good rave music to kind of have, just a real nice pitch to kind of get in that sort of sense. But it's just kind of interesting, kind of get a Marilyn Manson song with like some dance pep and just overall kind of jiviness towards it. Because most of these, I mean, Marilyn Manson later on would go on to have like more riff heaviness and just kind of more high octane kind of carnivorous type ones. They definitely had some rave songs, but this is just kind of an interesting one to kind of get in that. So it's just some good pitches to kind of get some of these. The third single, which is also the promotional single, is Dope Hat. And this is another nice one. This is kind of a harrowing, kind of eerie. Dope Hat is kind of a harrowing, kind of eerie bravado outing gem, I'd have to say. It's a trailblazing, kind of haunting rock cut, I would definitely suppose. And it's just also a pretty good hangout kind of hit. So this one, Marilyn Manson definitely has some good hangout type songs on here. Not all of these are kind of night outings and kind of car outings for just like traverse and just makeshift malaise as far as I kind of have. There's also some good ones to kind of have just within a sense of just kind of like a good hangout kind of pitch. Some other ones like that would be Cyclops and Sweet Tooth and Wrapped in Plastic. I'd have to suppose those are some great hangout ones. But Dope Hat kind of has, this is kind of an evening outing gem, I would say, just kind of similar to Lunchbox. It's kind of more eerie, just a little bit more. Dope Hat has a little bit more bravado, a little bit more pounding of one compared to Lunchbox. They're both pretty good. Lunchbox and Dope Hat are a pretty pounding 1-2 punch to kind of get for like some good night outing fare as far as that kind of happens. But these are both some good, just overall exhilarating type ones that just have a lot of energy. This one's a little bit more electronic sounding. Dope Hat kind of is, but I still like the poundiness of these particular ones. Just a lot of bravado about this one, that this works pretty well. That's basically like the concept of this particular album in terms of the singles. Like I was saying, like it was really Sweet Dreams that kind of put Marilyn Manson on the map as far as that particular pitch kind of happened. But this is like the album before the album. You'll get some folks that'll say that this is probably his best or one of his absolute best albums and the band's best albums. I feel like Antichrist Superstar, Portrait of American Family, this Marilyn Manson in the 90s is a good pitch, but then really a lot of his albums are just pretty damn good. It's just kind of the concept that it's recommended to get tons of these just as far as that pitch kind of happens. But we'll go ahead and talk about the songs I recommend on here. This would have to say, like, basically out of 12 songs, Misery Machine's the 13th song, and basically the prelude is just an intro, which I don't recommend. But to talk about, basically, prelude is just an intro. But out of 12 songs in this particular album, there's 10 songs I wound up recommending to. So the only 2 songs I don't recommend on here would just be My Monkey and Misery Machine. I just would say both these ones are just particularly kind of poor ones that just didn't add up too much. My Monkey is just kind of a messy type song that was just kind of all over the place in instrumentation. It was just kind of all over the place in terms of instrumentation. Just didn't really connect as well as far as like a good vibe to kind of have. One of the few blunders of this overall album. And then Misery Machine is just kind of one that just kind of had an awkward kind of pitch also. I mean, that one's Misery Machine was trying to be like an on the go type one, kind of similar to Get Your Gun and maybe a little bit of Dope Hat, but it just didn't pull it off quite as well as that particular one. Plus, I don't know why that song was 13 minutes. It was just kind of an awkward sense of it. But that's I'm kind of torn on whether or not I want to give this album like a 10 out of 10 because there's only really 2 songs out of 12 I don't recommend, which is pretty much exhilarating, just tour de force as far as that kind of happens, or if I want to give it a 9.5. I'm thinking I'm probably going to give it a 10 just in terms of impact, just because, I mean, out of 12 songs, just that many hit songs that are that quality, I'd have to say it pretty much, I would pretty much have to damn near say it deserves a 10 out of 10. So I'll just go ahead and say it's going to get a 10 out of 10 just because the debut and just the overall sheer quality of it and just the vibes and this overall poundiness of it is just blistering and just has a lot of blockade or just hit type songs that just really cover a lot of bases, I'd have to suppose. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, some of these songs I recommend on here, basically Organ Grinder's a pretty nice one. This is like a glitzy kind of night venue pizzazz of a song, I'd have to say. It's a decent dance hit, definitely. It's just a rowdy kind of catchy energy that this song particularly kind of has, and just has some vintage kind of Marilyn Manson kind of vibes. So this one, a little bit more of like an electronic kind of sense. This one's another kind of dance type hit, kind of similar to The song's a little bit similar to Lunchbox and that sort of pitch. Just a real kind of glitzy type night type song to kind of get. Do like the concept of this particular one. It's a little bit more contemporary and riveting compared to most rock songs when it comes to dance floors and that sort of stuff. But it's not really a rave type song, but it is kind of like a minor dance club. But it is kind of like a minor dance club type hit. So it's interesting for Marilyn Manson to do these sorts of songs because I can't. It's interesting for Marilyn Manson to do these sorts of songs because I can't think of too many times where they did them on later albums. I'd have to say, but it is a nice one. If you really like heavy riffage, Cyclops is a real nice one to kind of get within that sort of pitch. This is like a gnarled hit party starter, I'd have to say. This is like a turned up kind of vibes that it has, and it's just a backyard outing party. This song just has some backyard kind of outing vibes, definitely good for some backyard parties, smoke sessions, stuff like that. I'd have to say it's just got some great riffage, like I was saying before, and it's just an overall good hangout hit. So this is a pretty good one. Probably one of the gnarliest riffs on the particular album, I'd have to suppose. Real nice one, kind of similar to Get Your Gun and some of those type ones. I'd also have to say Dogma's pretty good for that. So those are some nice ones kind of get within that pitch. And then speaking of Dogma, this is like a shrill kind of manic dance ready spook of a tune, I'd have to suppose. It's just got a riveting kind of autumn time fun, definitely that it feels like. This is definitely some riveting kind of autumn time fun, I would have to say. And it's just got a real great, and the song just has a great kind of snappy vibe and riffs that it just has. So it's a good concept to kind of get that particular one. Another real shrill one, just like Get Your Gun and Cyclops, some of those particular ones, just some good nice ones kind of have for like a more kind of just riveting and turned up kind of backyard party. Definitely some good vibes. I mean, I like the fact that Marilyn Manson had some house party vibes on here. They do have some nightclub songs like Lunchbox, Dope Hat, and Organ Grinder, but they also have some other ones for just more around the house type fare, just in like a backyard sense, like Cyclops and Dogma and some of those type ones. But there's also some hangout songs on here. I do feel like Sweet Tooth is a nice one for that. I do feel like Sweet Tooth is definitely like a marinating kind of kickback brewer of a song, I'd have to say. It's some PlayStation and smokage type music, I would definitely feel like. It's just some great kind of hazy it's just and the song is just a great kind of hazy hangout hit, definitely. It's just an overall dope song. So another song similar to that would be Wrapped in Plastic. Both of these are like some good kind of rolling up some swishers, just kind of kick back, have some television on, just kind of not paying attention, just using it for white noises, stuff like that, just sipping Pepsi, things like that, footballs on, something of that sort of pitch. Just kind of some real good hangout type tunes, just kind of mingling, marinating, stuff like that, I'd have to suppose. But Wrapped in Plastic's definitely a good highlighted one. This is like a brewing kind of house party snaz of a song, I'd have to say. This is like a mid-tempo kind of bubbler, and it's just a primer for like a crazy night, I would definitely feel like. And it's just a good send-off to like a good kind of carnivorous type night as far as that pitch kind of happens. Definitely, I mean, it's probably about a 7 in energy or a 6.5 in energy compared to songs like Organ Grinder and Lunchbox and Get Your Gun and some of those type ones, and Dogma especially, and Cyclops. But I would have to say it's just a good primer to kind of have in that sort of sense. This one's kind of a house party snaz. This one's a little bit more turned up, not quite as marinating as much as Sweet Tooth, but it is just kind of a brewing one to kind of have as things get ready to get started. I'd have to suppose that's a good pitch of one. And all this album really keeps like the haunting vibe. So these are just great for some cool kind of September, October, Novembers as far as that kind of happens. So these all kind of have like the haunting, kind of similar to Korn and Mushroom Head, some of those type folks, White Zombie, some of those type folks, just within that pitch, I'd have to suppose. That's some good stuff. But Snake Eyes and Sissies is another good highlight on here. This is like a darkly kind of whimsical late day commerce of a song, I'd have to say. It's a great haunting feel that this song particularly kind of has with some pep, I would definitely say, and it's just a catchy kind of song. So this one, so Snake Eyes and Sissies is kind of haunting, but it has some pep about it. So this is kind of one that's on the go. There's another song that's like that. It's kind of similar to Get Your Gun. This one's just a little bit more whimsical, I'd have to say. Both Snake Eyes and Sissies and Get Your Gun are kind of more commerce type songs to kind of have on the go, just in a standard traverse during the day or late day as far as that pitch kind of happens. These are both kind of more whimsical type ones. Or I kind of feel like Snake Eyes and Sissies is more whimsical than Get Your Gun, but they're both pretty haunting type ones to kind of have within a dark sort of sense as far as that pitch kind of happens. So those are just some nice ones. And then Cake and Sodomy is another good one to pair up with Lunchbox and Dope Hat and Organ Grinder, I'd have to say. This is like a rave kind of night venue boiler. I would definitely have this song is like a rave kind of night venue boiler, I'd have to say. It's got a high octane energy for being out and about. I would definitely feel like it's just a good club hopping kind of fun that this song particularly kind of has. So these are just some nice ones. I'm glad that Marilyn Manson had all these club hoppers on here. This is definitely a pretty contemporary and kind of ritzy. This is definitely a pretty contemporary and overall glitzy kind of album to have for some night fare. It's definitely kind of interesting to get these kind of dance club and mild rave type vibes just in the particular pitch as far as that kind of happens. These are just some nice ones to kind of have for just a little bit of These four songs, Cake and Sodomy, Dope Hat, Lunchbox, and Organ Grinder, are all some glitzy type ones to have for like some good night outings as far as just having a little bit of night pizzazz just within that pitch. So it's definitely good to get some of these glamorous type. It's definitely good to get some of these glamorous type ones. This good sense of socialness. So the social score of this album is going to get a pretty high score also. So talk about the score. Talk about the score. The score of this album is going to get a 10 out of 10. But I'd go ahead and have to say that the social score is probably going to get a 10 out of 10 also, just because this is a pretty glamorous, just overall outing time. There's definitely some good night fares about this. There's definitely some pretty good night affairs about this particular album. It has a lot of good exhilarating just stepping out and hangout type fare. There's some hangout songs on here. There's some kind of outing and commerce type songs. There's some makeshift songs on here in the haunting sense. There's just a lot of shrill kind of October, November type vibes and September cooler weather type vibes. Just to kind of get in like some shock rock and horrific type tones as far as that combination kind of happens. It just has a really nice aesthetic and just overall kind of pitch type vibes and just like a dark sense that just give it a lot of manic type feels and just overall exhilarating energy. That's just kind of the concept. I feel like the only real thing is maybe they could. A lot of this album is more leery than riveting, I'd have to say. Apart from Get Your Gun and Cyclops and Dogma, most of this album is not super riff heavy. It's not to say I'm complaining about that wholesomely, but it's just kind of the concept that I do like the fact when Marilyn Manson gets crazy, songs like The Beautiful People, but they would flesh that out in later albums. I'm not going to knock this score for because of that. It's just kind of more of just like wishful thinking more so than actual bitching about it, I'd have to suppose. That's just kind of the concept. It gets a 10 score, 10 social, lots of manicness and just overall tour de force of just like some haunting kind of affairs that just have a lot of night and just overall oriented type stuff. It's just definitely a pretty stepping out type album to have for some social times and just overall outings. So some good stuff. In terms of the future, like Marilyn Manson has been kind of quiet in recent times. Like ever since like some of these women have come out and said some things about Marilyn Manson, he hasn't put out an album. He hasn't put out an album since late 2020. I'd have to say I kind of would like to get some more Marilyn Manson music, but I know because of some of these controversies, it's kind of here and there with the cancel culture and that type of stuff. I would have to say it's been kind of simmering down in recent times, but we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, this is definitely a 10 out of 10 album. I'd have to say there's a few more Marilyn Manson albums I'm going to get to, so we'll get to some of those as time goes along. But this is definitely one I'd have to highly recommend. It's just a haunting type album that covers a lot of bases.